Hello, I'm delighted to be at the EXARC's 12th conference giving this presentation on overcoming hurdles, an experimental approach to the use of hurdles in scaffolding. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Margaret Shackleton. I'm a chartered engineer, a member of the Institute of Civil Engineers. I have many decades of professional construction experience on 4 continents. I have a Master's in Civil and Building Engineering and also a Master's in Experimental Archaeology from Exeter University. This project was inspired by Binding's excellent book Medieval Building Techniques, in which he's collated over 1,000 images from medieval manuscripts. I noticed that several illustrations depict hurdles used either as scaffold boards or in the construction of ramps or ladders. This is also borne out by the fabric rolls or building accounts from cathedrals such as Exeter and castles such as Kirby Muxloe Castle near Leicester, where withies were purchased to make hurdles specifically for scaffolding. This project investigates the choice a medieval builder would have had to make between using hurdles or timber boards for scaffolding. Was it that hurdles were just replaced in terms of technology by scaffold boards? Was it to do with the amount of grip that they gave, or how long that they lasted, or the sizes and weights of what were available? And finally, how strong were they? What was their load-bearing capacity, and how did they fail? When wicker was first used is a long-standing archaeological debate. First, let's look at the nature of wicker and just how versatile it is. Here you can see a chess set that was made for the 2012 Olympics as part of the show jumping arena. As well as its strength, it is also very flexible. These airborne panniers were dropped by parachute to resupply troops during World War II. And these bottles were surrounded by wicker as a form of early bubble wrap. In this photo we can see a hurdle. This held 3 people. And this final slide is a recreation of an image in Binding's book where a hurdle was used as a ramp. An analysis was undertaken of the images in Binding's book showing scaffolding, ladders and ramps. This graph clearly shows that the number of illustrations increased as the centuries went by. The analysis then looked at the significance of the number of illustrations shown of particular items in each century. This graph shows that there were 2 items particularly relevant only in the 11th century. These are using tree trunks as ladders and, less significantly, standing on scaffolds with no boards. If we look at whether ramps or ladders were used, on the left and in the middle where hurdles are used, and on the right where scaffold boards are used, you can see that there is little difference over the centuries, thereby indicating that hurdles did not decrease over time. To determine the wear of hurdles, I constructed 2 hurdles made out of willow, and a 3rd seasoned hurdle was donated by a professional hurdle maker. These were then laid on the ground at a reconstruction of a Saxon village here in Devon. We decided not to raise them off the ground due to health and safety reasons. Visitors and school children were then encouraged to walk across the hurdles. This photo is taken 3 months and over 1,000 visitors later. There was no visible wear in the hurdles. However, the green hurdles had seasoned to their brown colour. Experimental work was also undertaken in Lejre in Denmark. This was to test the grip that the hurdles provided, not only in dry conditions, but also in the muddy and wet conditions that are common on construction sites. The participants were reenactors, staff and other visitors, including children. This was set up to something similar to the sweet track reconstruction, which is a riven timber plank. Participants were asked to evaluate the grip. Those who had experienced the riven plank during wet and muddy conditions said how much better the grip was on the hurdle. Participants who were barefoot also commented on how comfortable it was to walk on. Working in bare feet is often shown in Binding's book. Participants also expressed a desire to find out how the hurdles would perform on swampy and marshy ground. As we have seen, hurdles can come in practically any size or shape. In medieval times, would the builder have chosen their best timber to make scaffold boards out of? Was it more likely they just used any old offcuts to form something that after all is abortive work? Although I can't answer those questions, I think we can safely say that the scaffold boards used in medieval times would not have been up to the standard of a modern scaffold board today. As with all good research, we should find out what has been done already. However, I struggled to find any information or any research into the strength of wicker. For example, this photo is the recreation of a basket used by Isambard Kingdom Brunel when building the Clifton Suspension Bridge. There are records to show his calculations as to how strong the rope needed to be that supported this basket, but nothing about the actual strength of the basket itself. I found a report by the Civil Aviation Authority into hot air balloon baskets, in which they stated that they could find no research or information on the strength of wicker. Therefore, I decided to determine the strength of wicker as I would any other construction material. This is done by placing a load on the structure and measuring its deflection. I decided to split the physical testing into two parts. Firstly, the raw material, the withies that the hurdles are made of. This included hazel and willow, with the willow processed in 4 different ways, although buff and steamed would not have been available to the medieval builder. I also tested a small piece of riven timber. Secondly, small hurdle panels were constructed so that these could be tested. Each of the 52 samples had their diameter measured. These ranged from 6 to 29 millimeters and were then tested in the Instron tensile machine at different spans from 130 to 295 millimeters. This machine gradually increases the deflection while measuring the resistance to that deflection. This then gives us a load to deflection graph, which contains important information as to how the sample is performing. In this photograph we can see what happened to the riven plank. In layman's terms, it snapped. And in this graph at the top we can see the load deflection curve, where the failure is sudden and catastrophic and provides no residual support. In the graph below we can see what happens to the withies. There are 2 factors that need to be considered when looking at the results from the individual samples. These are that they could slide across the supports, and also when they failed they tended to kink, but then are still capable of holding some residual strength. The testing of the withies indicated that there is a difference in performance between withies with the bark on, which seem to be stronger, and those which have had the bark removed. 3 hurdles were made for load testing. Each were recorded for their size, weight and the diameter of their members. The hurdle panels and 3 modern scaffold boards were then tested in the concrete flexural testing machine, which slowly increases the load while measuring the deflection. This deflection was so great with the hurdles that it caused us a problem. So following an oil leak we adjusted the machine's setup. Due to the small span that this machine was able to give us, we could also test both ends of the hurdle panels. Once again, the most striking difference between the 2 is their mode of failure. In the top graph we can see the modern scaffold boards, which are 38mm thick. Their load-bearing capacity ranged from 10 to 40 kilonewtons. However, when they failed suddenly and catastrophically. In the bottom graph, we can see the performance of the hurdles. At around 10 to 20mm, we can see that they don't carry the same load, their maximum load being between 1 to 3 kilonewtons. And when they fail, they do so with what we know as redundancy. This means that although one aspect fails, another part of the structure continues holding the load. In practice, this has the advantage that you would feel the panel beginning to break and could then move yourself to safety. One of the images that struck me most from Binding's book was of a scaffold board snapping and the worker falling to his death. The medieval artist had illustrated this by showing an angel catching the man as he fell, while another clung to the roof for dear life. This graph shows the weight compared with the surface area provided of the hurdles and scaffold boards. Unsurprisingly, the modern scaffold boards at 38mm thick are 3 times heavier than the hurdles, which were up to 20mm thick. In temporary works on construction projects, it is important to reduce the weight of anything that needs supporting, thereby reducing the cost of the temporary works. In this graph, I have compared the weight per surface area provided by the two options against their strength. In this comparison, hurdles are twice as effective as modern scaffold boards. So in conclusion, there is no evidence that hurdles were replaced by scaffold boards. Hurdles fail in a safer way than scaffold boards do. Hurdles have a better strength to its weight per surface area. Hurdles have better grip in the wet and mud than scaffold boards. Hurdles behave more like a fabric than a construction sheet material. Further investigation is needed in the following areas. The performance of hurdles needs quantifying, especially with consideration to its fabric-like qualities. The performance of withies with their bark on compared to stripped off also needs further investigation. Further research is needed into all temporary works used within the construction industry, including scaffolding, ladders and ramps. The use of wicker before medieval times is another area to be explored. Thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions or comments that you may have on the project.